All right. Hello. If you're new here, my name is Brianna, also known as Dread Private Bree, and I'm the resident artist for WatercolorSnacks. Super glad that you guys could be here today. And we're going to be focusing on a landscape. Some of you have really expressed interest in doing landscapes, and this is the perfect palette for it. So I'm going to let Lee highlight our space. This is the example that I shared with you all yesterday. And it looks like there's quite a bit of detail, but we're going to be breaking it down and kind of going through it. I do have some swatch pages over here. I do always recommend sacrificing one page from the pad to work as your swatch testing page, because then you will be able to know how a color or water paint ratio will behave on the paper before you apply it to your piece, which I feel like is super, super valuable. So, okay, and with that, we're gonna go ahead and dive in. So the first thing we're gonna do, I wanna say, as I've been exploring with these, both of these brushes are very, very absorbent. So they hold a lot of water. And this paper doesn't dry very fast. It handles the water well, but it doesn't dry fast. So I wanted to point that out. I'm gonna quickly trim some of these hairs on my brush. This is probably the better ways to do it, but they were bothering me. So we're going to go ahead and start with a bit of an underpainting. And we're going to do that with our color yellow. So by taking the yellow color, I'm just reactivating paint that I already have. And there is a difference in pulling straight from wet paint and pulling from reactivated paint. Nothing super profound. There's just, I find that I can have a little bit more control when I'm working on paint that I have to reactivate versus, just pulling from it wet, because there's way more opportunity for pigment. Now I'm adding quite a bit of reactivated paint here because we're going to be testing it out for the transparency. We want to have a nice translucent color. I'd say that's good, but adding a little bit of water to it. And I'm going to actually add the water with a dropper versus the brush, because again, these brushes are highly absorbent, which is a good thing. It can be a double-edged sword at times. And what we're going to do is we're going to essentially do this whole foreground area. We're just going to lay down a very sheer color of yellow. This is even a little bit pigmented, but that's okay because it's going to be sheer, and that's what we're looking for. And we're just kind of blocking in that whole area. It's the tree trunk and the mushrooms that we're trying to block in. You are also free to get experimental with what you want to add to your illustration. If you want to add a frog, if you want to add, a squirrel or an acorn or something like that, go for it. You're not restricted to just what we have.
Yes, I saw that.
And so this is what it's gonna look like. You're just gonna kind of see this little yellow glow, and that's exactly how we want it to be. I could probably afford to have it a little bit lighter than this, but that's going to be okay. We're going to be adding some layers more as it goes. I'm going to give you a moment to go ahead and finish that. Now we're going to do a similar process, but this time we're going to do it blue. So taking some of the reactivated blue, and I'm just kind of doing a little bit because this Prussian blue is very strong. Yeah, very strong. What we're going to do is we're going to essentially fill in that sky area. And we're going to do that by making sure we have a nice translucent layer. So we don't want it to be too pigmented. Always use your swatch page. And I did share about how you could be using a dry brush effect in your pieces and where that can be applied. And Rodney came up with a really great example of clouds, like a specific kind of cloud. I don't remember the name of it, but so if you're finding that your brush is naturally leaning towards dry brush or something like that, or it's just not carrying the moisture quite as well, just embrace it because it works well with skies. What we're going to want to do is we're just going to start to apply a base. Actually, we're going to apply a base. We're letting it go on real sheer, kind of like following the line of where that tree trunk is. think I meant to add water to it, but that's okay. This works with a dry, wet on dry technique. And I'm just going to kind of try and fade it downwards as I go. We don't want it to be too dark and too saturated. You might be thinking, where do the clouds come in? Well, we're going to be doing a lifting technique. The dry brush comes in later. So making sure that your brush is nice and dry. I patted it dry. We're going to go ahead. We're going to lift some areas. While the area is still wet, you go in there with your dry brush and just kind of drag where you want there to be some highlights. And those highlights are going to serve as our clouds later on. And I'm kind of like trying to go in a similar direction. I'm not really doing the traditional puffy clouds. I'm kind of doing these longer clouds. If you're finding that your color is not lifting, that just means that your paint has dried a little bit more, and you can easily remedy that by adding just a little bit of water. So there's a little bit of water in my brush here. The water will reactivate the paint enough so you can start to lift it. And here, it's kind of faint against the camera and the lighting and everything, but you can kind of see that there is some white highlights there. And before we add more to it, we're going to let that rest before adding more. I'm going to give you a moment to go ahead and finish up your cloud area. All right. So next, what we're going to do, we're going to start to fill in some of this tree section. Yeah, I'm just kind of touching the space. And I'm not actually going to be mixing anything. I'm just going to be kind of pulling from some reactivated burnt umber. Get it nice and reactivated. We're just going to make a nice usable color right there. Usable, malleable, translucent. We're going to start with translucent because what we're going to do, the bark is actually done in layers. So the bark is filled with layers to kind of give it some texture. So we start lighter and move darker. Always test before applying. I'd say that could use like a drop of water. All right. And then with that, you're going to take your translucent burnt umber and you're just going to start to kind of lay in some streaks, just kind of some rough streaks, like some are a little bit touching, some can be swirly. We're just going to start to lay in some kind of rough bark textures. And we're doing that by just kind of going up and down into these strands almost. And don't worry about it being perfect. We're not here for perfection on this. We're just laying down kind of basic shapes. Now you'll notice I'm using the oval wash brush quite a bit. And the reason for that is it kind of helps to keep me nice and loose, not overthinking. And down here, I'm kind of working more, allowing the paint to kind of just be solid. And that's because this area here is going to have a lot of shadow with it. So we're not going to have a lot of differentiating textures there, other than the shadows that we start to bring in more. I am trying to keep the edge because that's where our light source is coming from. Our light source is kind of coming from the sky there. So so on this side of the tree is going to be kind of dark, but this side of the tree is going to be kind of light. So you'll notice I kind of had more of a lighter tone there. And I am picking up any excess moisture and paint. And that's just because I want to make sure that I don't overwork the piece and that I can actually finish on time this time. So we did the first layer of the bark. Congrats! We're going to do a similar thing. We're just kind of going around. We're just kind of looping around and kind of doing base layers for a lot of things and kind of building the layers as we go. Watercolors are really important to focus on different areas of your piece rather than just everything all at once. Because while you're waiting for some areas to dry, while I'm waiting for my bark to dry, I'm going to focus on the mushroom cap right here. And we're going to do that by just activating our permanent red light, which is basically a vermilion color, let's be honest. And again, trying to keep it somewhat light, not too oversaturated. And this red is a powerful color. Now, where we want to keep, I don't know the name of this mushroom. Ironically, I don't know the name of this mushroom, but it's the classic red mushroom with the white specks on it. Those white specks have kind of a specific direction. It's not like the classic, polka dot kind of specks. So we're going to kind of try and capture that texture by just taking that, and we're going to be filling it in, but we're going to be filling it in kind of like on the side. So taking just from the side, using the edge of the brush, we're going to guide the paint, and we're going to kind of do these little block-ins and kind of skipping over as we do, because those skips are going to kind of work as our highlights or the white specks. Because again, we're not dealing with real polka dot kind of shapes. We're kind of just dealing with stripy things. So don't overwork it. It's pretty simple. And we're going to do the same thing with this little tiny one right here. But don't overwork it. Just kind of lay it in and let the organic movement take the lead. And that's all it needs. Bring it up closer to the camera so you can kind of get a see for it. But that's all it needs for now. We'll circle back around to that one later. All right. Go ahead and give a moment there. All right. So what we're going to do next, we're going to shift over to our mountain right here. This mountain has a lot of character to it, and it looks like I spent a long time on it. It consists of about 2 layers. What we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and pull from our Davies gray. It's Davies gray, not Dave's gray. Our Dave's gray, which is basically a muted green. This color is a little interesting. It seems to be naturally transparent, like it's really light in pigment. A lot of these other colors are super vibrant in pigment, like very strong. This one is a bit weak, which is a good thing when we want it to be, because it can work as a really great shadow. Yeah, but it's got this perfect stone kind of color to it, the stone tone. There we go, stone tone. Let's keep that forever. And what we're going to do is, starting from one point, this will be your highest point of your mountain. We're going to go ahead and we're going to start to lay in. We're going to kind of overlap with kind of doing the same kind of blocking texture there. And remember, when we first were playing around with the brush strokes and techniques of this oval wash brush, we experimented with texture and kind of like how that curved texture of the brush kind of creates this nice organic feel. And we're kind of looking to do the same thing that we did with the mushroom, and we're just kind of trying to preserve those highlights as we can. Not everywhere, and I'm going to have some highlights, some areas are more highlighted than others. And that's what's going to help to kind of differentiate your depth. This mountain is not going to be exact like the other mountain is, and that's okay, because we're dealing with nature and it's just never going to be exact. Now, what I'm doing here with a damp brush, I'm just kind of taking it down and fading it out. Just trying to fade it out, get a nice gradient. And don't worry too much about lines on it, because we're going to be overlapping this. We're going to be overlapping it with another layer. So don't focus too hard on it. I just wanted to kind of make it a little bit more cohesive. And I'm just going to take a damp brush here and wipe up some of the excess. Just lifting. I am lifting a little bit into my mountain, but that's okay, because this mountain is going to require a second layer, don't forget. So I wanted to absorb as much excess moisture as I could, because that's going to help enable the mountain to have to dry a little bit quicker, so that we can use it. I'm going to give you a moment to finish your mountain. But we're doing pretty good, making pretty good progress. And what we're focusing on here, this tree and mushrooms, they're kind of the focal point. This is in your foreground. The background consists of the mountain and the trees and the sky, but your foreground is going to consist of your branches, your trunk, mushrooms, and this little shrub. For some reason, this shrub betrayed me. We're going to try and make a better shrub. All right, we're going to turn our attention back to our sky now. Taking the same color that you did before, that diluted blue, we're going to go in and we're going to start to add a second layer. And by layering the same shade on top, we're going to start to create some more depth. And I'm going to be trying to pull forward those cloud textures, kind of fading out the color so it's not overpowering. And by adding just a little bit of color around the edges of those clouds is what kind of helps to build the contrast. We're pushing our lights lighter by doing that. By pushing our darks darker, we're pushing our lights lighter. And I'm not going completely around like in a full circle. I'm just kind of focusing on certain corners here and there. Some are going to be way deeper in tone than other colors, and that's okay. I think one of the most forgiving practices when it comes to watercolor has probably got to be clouds. Because clouds are just, you can't go wrong with clouds. Clouds can look like anything. And having the different coffee stain textures and all those really helps. Now, excuse me while I go ahead and mix some more of my blue because I've run out. And that's just by adding some blue and a little bit of water. Make sure it's nice and mixed. And here, just gonna be going and adding a few deeper tones into the corners. If you're wanting to go deeper, sometimes it is best to just add some paint. Now that's too much paint right there, but that's okay because we're just going to take that and we're just going to scrub it around with the water that's already on there, and it's going to be okay. I'm going to have to stop with these clouds, otherwise they're going to get very overworked, and then I won't be able to work on top of it. Always take a dry brush and kind of lift up some of that moisture. This brush is very good at holding water, I will say that, which is what you want when it comes to watercolor. I have dealt with brushes where it doesn't hold hardly any water, and I keep sitting there thinking, why is it so difficult? Why am I struggling so much? Well, I'm struggling as much as I am because I don't have the right brush. Brushes really do make a difference when it comes to your application. All right. I'm gonna go ahead and bring that close to the camera so you can kind of see. It's a little wet, but you can kind of see that there. I'd say that's good. All right. I'll give you a moment to wrap up your clouds before we turn our attention back to our mountain friend. All right, we're going to take the Davies Gray. I'm going to add a little bit more pigment to it because we want to start to deepen some of that contrast. Now, if you are trying to reactivate your Davies Gray and you're just finding it is really difficult, you can pull straight from the tube. It doesn't have to be constant reactivation. This is why I love tube paints, because you can either reactivate paint or you can just pull straight from the jar. And we're just taking a more saturated tone of it. Excuse me, I pull out all the excess moisture hiding there. And we're going to do the same thing that we were doing, kind of like overlapping and kind of leaving some areas highlighted, but we're going to be doing it kind of focused on one side. What we're trying to attempt is capturing shadows. What we're doing now is we're adding shadows. And I'm following the edge right here. We don't actually see the sun. It's just the highlight of day. So I am packing a little bit more color right onto the edge of the corners, like just on the rim of the mountain right there, because I want that to be differentiated from the background. I want to pull it from the background, which is a very light background. So I want, by adding more emphasis onto the edge, it kind of creates its own line work. And we're just kind of carrying it down, kind of smudging it as we go. Add a little bit more here. Remember to not overthink it. If you find that you're overthinking it, hold your brush higher on the handle, like more towards the end, because that's going to keep it from being super, super like detailed. You're just trying to capture a natural, organic feel to it. Just kind of fading that out. And then I'm just going through and adding a little bit more onto the rim. There we go. Right. All right, now what we're going to do, we're going to turn back to our tree trunk here. And we're going to take a more saturated version of the burnt umber. So by adding some more pigment to the diluted version we already have should be just plenty. We're going to add a little trick to this one because we want to have some more of the grainy textures here. You'll notice there is some actual lines in here, and I'm going to show you how to achieve them. There is a technique, and I have talked about this in the past, but we're going to talk about it as though it's brand new. There is a technique called a scoring technique. We're going to do I'm going to do a little example over here to show you what that looks like. You're going to take kind of a dull object with a blunt object with just kind of a tip right there. Not as fine point as a pen or a needle or anything like that, but just kind of like the edge of your paintbrush. We're going to go ahead and just use the green here. By applying a wet layer, while it is still wet, you are going to take your object, your pen type, your brush, you're going to start to lay in some line work. This is really great for veins on leaves. And what this is doing, because watercolor paper has such a thickness to it, the paint is actually moving into the grooves of those veins that we've created. And it's kind of, this is what's called a scoring technique. And this is how you can start to achieve some of those kind of natural grain effects. You can use it for leaves, you can use it for bark, you can use it for just some texture, you can even create patterns, you know, you can, the possibilities with it are endless, but this is essentially what we're going to be doing. And I used to always score my paper first and then add paint, and I'll show you what that looks like. I have found it to not be as successful. You can't see it on the camera, but there is a scored texture there, it's like right in here. So with that, we're going to go ahead and add some color. We're going to use blue right on top. This can work because then what it does is it does travel into the areas, but it can be hard to control. And this one takes a little bit more time for it to be noticeable as well. You can kind of see it there, but I have found that by laying down the color first and scoring it while it's still wet is better. So we're going to go ahead and do that with our tree trunk. And what we're going to do is we're going to do something similar that we did before, where we're applying just kind of patches of the bark, making sure it's a little bit more saturated. Perfect. So while we're just going to be laying it in, we're going to be putting more emphasis on the corners there, kind of the edges right here, where there's going to be the most shadow. And I'm just kind of using the edge of my my paintbrush, because I want it to be narrow. I don't want it to be full. I'm not trying to cover a whole large section. I just want it to create grains. So I'm using the side of my brush and kind of go in here and just kind of start to lay in some color. Now, while that is still wet, before I move on to the rest of the trunk, because this is a good piece, we're going to go in, we're just going to start to lay in some bark textures. And we're going to kind of branch from there, kind of move upwards. And I'm using more towards the front of my the handle, but you can always use more starting from the back of the handle. You can create some really great tree knots with that. Color right there. And then go ahead and start to add in some of that here. Again, preserving where the light is shining, where the light source is coming from. Now there is a section right here where the tree trunk starts to go into more, well, just like that, tree trunk. So I'm going to carve out score right there. That might have been, I might have waited a little bit too long on that one. So I'm just going to add a little bit of paint right in there. You can kind of go and curve that. You don't want to do too much with this one because we are going to be overlaying with some grass, but it just looked a little plain right there. So I wanted to give it a little more texture. And our tree is coming along. Right. Now here's where we're going to start to add some more mixing as we go. We've done pretty well to just be using the colors straight as they are, but here we're going to start to introduce some mixing here and there. So we're going to go ahead and start. We're going to come back to our mushrooms right there. We're going to be adding another layer similar to what we did with the mountain, where we're just doing the same technique. We're just adding another layer to it. However, we're going to shift the tone of this a little bit. We're going to add the red, but then we're going to add some brown to it because we want to create more of a shadow. We don't want to just layer. We want to add a little bit of a tweak. So by using the same color and adding just another color with it, it keeps the cohesion of the application with the base color, but adding a little bit more of a shade. What we're trying to get is more of a less vibrant tone. We want to kind of mute it down a little bit. Rinse the brush real quick. And if you're ever in doubt, then always just swatch the original color just to kind of see. Yeah, I'd say that's maybe a little bit more brown could benefit. There we go. So what we've done is we created just a little bit more muted, and it's just the red light permanent red light, and then the burnt umber. There we go. So drawing off my brush, picking up the color, we're just going to kind of go and we're going to lay it in. We're going to emphasize mostly on this far corner, again, kind of remembering where our light source is. And we're going to be trying to preserve kind of that light source as being kind of the highlight. So I'm kind of dabbing it more here. Whereas before I was kind of going in with a like a straight back and forth, and here I'm kind of dabbing it a little bit more, kind of fading as we get closer to that outer edge. Because we want to create the shadow. I want it to be the heaviest, the darkest point, on the far end, looking to cover up most of that brighter red. And then fading it as we get more towards the outside. Just kind of working on a gradient. And you'll see that we've already kind of started to create a little bit of a shadow effect. And do the same for the little tiny mushroom friend over here. Yeah. All right. Now these mushrooms, they've got the traditional kind of white cream tone in the stem of it. And we don't have a cream tone with us, which is fine because what we want to do is we want to kind of mix the right tone. So what we've done by laying down the very sheer yellow tone, we're going to be working on adding shadow on top of it. And we're going to do that by just using a very diluted burnt umber. I'm going to quickly test this. I am switching to the Winsor & Newton finer tip brush, by the way. That's a pretty good one. This one holds a lot of water, so it does pack a punch. So what we're going to do is we're just going to kind of go in. We're going to kind of find where the darkest points are. I'm kind of going underneath the mushroom here. We're going to start to fade it out with a damp brush. As soon as I've applied it, I rinsed off. I pulled out the excess moisture and I kind of just kept a damp brush and I kind of faded it. Just a little bit. Let me show you. So by lining where the edge is, and then fading it from there is what allows me to be able to have a line work feel without it, or not necessarily line work feel, but like a definition. There's definitely a definition happening of where the separation is between the two subjects. So we've got like the underside where the gills will be, and then we've got a little bit of the skirt there. And I'm just going to go ahead and add a little bit of a shadow underneath because the cap of the mushroom will cast a shadow below. And then we're going to go ahead and do a few little lines. I'm going to bring this up closer for the skirt of the mushroom. Ooh, it's a wet area. That's okay. By taking a dry brush, you can just lift that color up and kind of fan it out. And where the color bled the most is not terrible because that's where most of our shadow is going to be anyway. So it kind of just helped us. We're going to do a similar thing for right underneath the skirt. We're going to kind of find where the layer is right there. And we're going to do the same thing. We're going to kind of fade it downwards. Now, don't worry, we're not going to be keeping it just this same color as the tree. We will be adding some more shadow to it, but we're going to gotta go in layers. And just go ahead and repeat those same steps for our other smaller mushroom friend. So it's definitely far from being done, but you can already kind of see we've got some definition going. We've got like a little bit of a highlight rim on the edge. And it's actually making me think that I need to add a little bit more to this far edge here. Simply because it's how the rest of the mushroom is in this little, oh, there we go. That's better. All right, I'm going to go ahead and give you a moment to finish up your mushroom area before we move on to the next. All right, the next thing we're going to be focusing on is these trees. Now I'm going to show you a quick demonstration of how we do the trees. You guys have probably seen me talk about these before, but in case you have not, here's how we do it. I'm just going to pull from the green right here. I'm going to mix a different green when we actually apply, but we're going to just pull green. So here's how we do the trees. This is the basic concept. This example is going to be a little bit bigger than what we're actually going to be applying because I want you to be able to see it. You're going to start by drawing a line, and while the line is still wet, you're going to just start to branch. You're going to start from the top, and you're going to kind of zigzag your way down. Now, this can be a little bit hard to do with a tiny brush. We're using a tiny brush for the actual application, but I'm going to go ahead and switch to this one. Because I find I can get better branches when it comes to larger trees. And you're just kind of zigzagging all your way down, kind of going bigger the further down you get, until finally you get to the bottom. And you're just going to kind of fade it down, just with a damp brush. And here you have a tree, and you can give your trees different life. You can have less branches, you can have more branches, you can preserve more white spots to make it look like there's snow on the branches. This is pretty much endless in your possibilities. Once I learned this technique, trees are way easier. Now, this is a very specific type of tree. This is like an evergreen or a pine tree, which in Washington, which by the way, this makes me feel very much like Washington. It's where I live. But these trees are the most friendly to me. So that's why we're doing these trees. But we're going to do them in a very small way. So we're just going to kind of take that concept and shrink it down. But first we have to build our correct color. You might see in the example piece, there's like 2 different greens happening, but that's okay too, because in a forest, there's all different kinds of greens, all different kinds of trees. But we are going to mix our own. We're going to start with the phthalo green. I always think it's Viridian. It's not. It's phthalo green. Phthalo green. And then we're going to mix the burnt umber with it. Because the burnt umber has just enough warmth to cool down that phthalo color and kind of make it a little bit more of a neutral type green. You can go ahead and mix that in, remove the excess, and then go ahead and test it. Yeah. So we have the straight green right here, and like, look what that brown did. It made it just this nice, beautiful kind of, not even a grass green. Closer, it's not a sap green, but it is closer to a sap green than it is to a Viridian. So there is our green. And I'd say even the application is pretty good of it. And what we're going to do is we're going to start by creating a hill. So excuse me while I switch brushes. We're going to do that with our round brush. We're just going to start, and we're going to kind of carry it down. And we're going to carry it down. And we're going to try and keep it as wet as we can. But I am going to fade it down. And I'm going to try and remove as much excess moisture to this as possible, because that is what's going to enable us to be able to add our layers. So by drying off the brush, I'm just going to go ahead and remove some of the excess moisture there. It'll dry quicker. Now what we do, we start to add trees to the tops of those hills. These are going to be a little different trees, and that's okay because they're really far away. We just need the texture. We just needed to know that they're trees. I will admit, I struggle with getting really, really fine details with this particular brush. So if you are like me and you are struggling to get those really thin lines with this particular brush, you're not alone. It has to do with the way the brush is shaped. It's not quite as tapered along the edge as some other brushes are. And it holds water really well, which both of those things combined is going to make it a little bit more of a challenge, but that's okay. Trying to not have too much water there. And you can, for the sake of making it more organic. Spread out the trees a little bit. Have some closer together, some taller, some shorter, some further away.
Hey Bree, this is Lee. Looking good.
Thank you.
We're about halfway through this session.
Wonderful. Thank you. Right. And that's your first line of your treetops there. And we're going to let that rest. This paper, I can kind of already tell it's getting a little bit overworked. It's getting a little grainy. And that's just because going over with too much water all at once can do that. That's okay. That's why we're going to let it rest. We're going to shift our focus. Yeah, let's shift it back over to the tree. So in this tree, there's definitely a different tone here versus where we're at right here. And that's because it actually has an overlay or a glazing. I don't understand glazing very much, but I know it's almost like an underpainting, but on the top. So an underpainting is kind of lying underneath, and a glazing is kind of laying it on top of the piece versus underneath it. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be doing a type of glazing. And we're going to be doing that with our Davies gray. So kind of pulling the Davies gray. Again, if you need to pull it from the tube, you can. If you want to reactivate it, it takes a little bit more, but that's okay. Working that in really good. Also a fun little tip, if you are ever dealing with watercolors that are just really sheer and it feels like you're just constantly scrubbing at it, trying to get a thicker application of color, you can do that by simply taking some drops of water and laying it on and letting it soak. That will help to loosen up and reactivate your paints, no matter how sheer they are. So you can get the most out of them that you can. So with that, we're going to go ahead and test out our color. That's a little too sheer for me. Oh, no, maybe it's not. Okay. And you can simply do this. You can test this just by going right over swatches you've already done. And that's it's a good tone. All right. Taking the Davies gray. We're starting from the farthest edge closest to the tape. And we're going to just lightly follow it down. I say lightly because whenever you add water or paint on top of paint that's already there, you are reactivating pigment. This doesn't work super well on really wet areas. And this is good, but it's not pigmented enough. And I'm just trying to do like a simple wash. I'm not trying to do like to soak it or overwork it. I think I may have added a blue. I cannot remember my exact color combinations, so forgive me, but the Davies gray has such a beautiful shade to it, a beautiful shadow texture tone to it. And I really like it. Just as is. It's kind of it's like a shadowy tone, but it's definitely an earthier shadow tone. Going and following where that bark is. Now that's a pretty wet application right there, which is okay. I am lifting because I do want to do another layer with a little bit more blue. The universal shadow color across all mediums you're working with is purple, but when you don't have purple, shoot for a cool tone or a muted tone. It's all preference. while we're waiting for the tree trunk to settle down a little bit, we're going to go through, we're going to do another round of trees, but we're not going to start with the hill this time. We're just going to go in and we're just going to start laying in some trees. Repeating the same pattern, just kind of, well, not necessarily pattern, but the same effect, kind of going with different. And the fun part is, as your trees are coming closer with each layer, they can get a little bigger because they're coming more into the foreground. So the perspective, at first when I was doing it, I noticed my trees were getting bigger as I kept going. And I was like, oh no, this is bad. And I was like, no, wait, this is good, because the trees are changing perspective. So by having them be a little bit bigger, and a little bit bigger, and a little bit bigger, and so on and so forth, it helps with the depth perception of your piece. And overlapping even more so, it's bound to happen because we're trying to make really packed trees. We're going for a forest. So don't worry about packing it too much. Creating a forest. Now I am going to fade out some of the bottom with a very, very, very lightly damp brush. So it's not even like fully damp. And the reason for this is I want to have a green tone even underneath. Like as we're seeing the trees, I want the tone underneath it to be green. I don't want it to be white. It can be a lighter kind of green, but I just don't want it to be white. So I went in with a very, very light, lightly damp brush just to pull that downwards. All right. So what we're going to do here, we're going to attempt to mix straight from the tube. And I'll show you what I mean by that in a minute. We're going to take, I'm not even going to bother with a, maybe I will. We're going to take a Davy's Gray. If I can open it. There we go. We're going to take Davy's Gray because it is so pale. We're going to add a little smoosh of it. Then we're going to take the Prussian blue. Do the same, because why not? We've never really done this before. This is not a recommended way of mixing watercolors because watercolor a little bit goes such a long way. You've seen the dot cards. We're just doing a tiny, tiny bit of blue. You'll see the difference between the Davy's Gray and the blue is very, very big, or very drastic, because the blue is super powerful and I don't want the blue to be that powerful. We're going to go ahead, we're just going to kind of mix that with the end of the brush. Reason being, if we wanted to mix it with the actual brush, we'd need to add more water, and the chances of the actual bristles picking up all the paint and having to rinse it out is very high. So we're mixing it with just the end of the brush, just mixing it in real good, and we're going to test it and see how this goes. I'm pulling on the corner. Testing the color. When you're if you're ever mixing colors like this, very, very small amount, but like look at how much blue is in just that little tiny mixture. I'm gonna pull from a different corner. Yeah, there's a lot of blue in that, just from that tiny bit. So the blue is way more pigmented than the Davy's Gray, which is fine because we know. Now we know. So what we're going to do, I'm going to add a couple drops of water. And we're going to attempt the glazing again. Just trying to make sure that the water is mixed in with the paint well enough. There we go. And this is going to help us build our shadow. The green layer, the Davies gray that we already used, it still had a purpose. It still created a shadow there, but we want to push those values some more. So we're going to go ahead and just kind of lightly glaze down. There's a gnat flying around here, so forgive me, I'm a little distracted. There we go. Right, and that is already helping. Like you can kind of see how it is separate from the light source there, from the edge of it. We will add some more to kind of deepen out the colors a bit more, but we're going to go ahead and shift focus. While we're waiting for this to dry and for our trees to calm down, we're going to go ahead and focus on the rest of the shading for the mushrooms. Now, for the mushrooms, I actually made my own shading for it, or its own color. And it's actually, I believe it's a combination of the Prussian blue and the burnt umber. Reason being, I wanted the blue color, but I wanted to tone it down. So I tone it down with the brown, because the brown is going to give it a more muted effect. The red color makes it kind of an orangey, greenish tone. Now this will still give it kind of an orangey greenish tone, but it'll be a little bit more softer. It'll be a little softer, less in your face, because that red is very in your face. Getting a little bit more blue. We made a beautiful like khaki green though. Remember, if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. I love answering your questions while we're live. It is the easiest to give you an on-site demonstration. Yeah, there we go. So it's kind of this muted teal color almost, which is actually great. But what we're going to do is we're going to start to create the deeper shadows of this mushroom. And I'm just kind of applying it where the whites of the mushroom are, not necessarily the specks, but just the underlayer of it. Always checking to make sure that the application is going to be all right. We're just going to kind of lock in. I'm going to fade out, soften some, well, not necessarily fade out, but we're going to soften some of the edges. Just kind of carrying it down. And this one, I am softening some of the edges, but I'm also letting some of them just kind of be a little bit more rigid, because shadows are a combination. It takes both rigid and soft. If it's all too soft, then it looks really blended and looks kind of not natural. And if it's all really hard, well, then you're dealing with cell shading, and that's also okay, but it doesn't necessarily lean into the natural aspect of it. So just remember that as you're adding shadows and highlights to things, it is a combination of faded and harsh lines or rigid lines. Now this shading color is this shading color is a little bit more green than what I have in my original one, but it actually looks really good. It kind of has a little bit more life to it, and I kind of like that there's a bit more of a there's more of a defined shadow. If you will look between the two, there's more of a defined shadow in the second version, which I appreciate more.
Hey, Bree, we got a comment in the chat, question in the chat from Sherry. Yeah. What color combination did you use for this shadow?
For this shadow, I used a combination of the burnt umber and Prussian blue. And with that, it's really a preference thing. When I first mixed it, I think there was too much brown, and I got this khaki brownish green color, which was not bad, but it wasn't the color I was looking for. So I added just a tiny bit of Prussian blue. Remember that the Prussian blue is really powerful. You only need a little bit. So I'd say experiment with the combination, because I don't know exactly the ratio. But it's just the Prussian blue and the burnt umber. That's all it is. And it will create a bit more of a greenish hue, but that's okay, because we're dealing with earth and nature. So green is all about. It's all about green. All right. I'm going to give you a moment. If you're wrapping up your mushroom shadow there, I'm going to give you a moment. Checking out the trees. All right. So now I'm seeing something here. I was leaning towards the pine trees up top, but I realized that the tree right here, the tree line, gets really lost. Like the highlight of where the light source is on this tree gets really lost. So we're going to push the values of that with using the sky. So with the Prussian blue, I'm just going to make it slightly more saturated, not much, just a little. Yeah. With the Prussian blue, we're going to go ahead. We're going to start to just add a little bit of color right along the edge, kind of deepening it out, not creating a line work, but creating a definition. We're going to fade it out into the rest of the sky. We're going to kind of like make it a little rough. We're not going to make it a nice smooth wash. We're going to make it a little bit rough. Kind of the same thing around the mountain right there. Just add a little bit more color. Remember to always push your darks darker and your lights lighter. Yeah. But what that's done, you can kind of already tell that it's pushed that tree more into the foreground, which is exactly what we wanted. All right. So now we have to let the sky settle again, but we're going to go ahead and shift back down to our focus to the trees. I need to find where I put my green. They're all starting to look like, there we go. Nice hunter green. And then we're doing the same thing. You're going to repeat those rows of trees. And here's where you can start to get a little bigger if you want. And really blot them in. I'm just going down in zigzags, kind of dabbing it as I go, not really going in zigzag motions, although that could be a really great abstract approach. There we go. That line looks a little bit symmetrical to me. But that's okay, because we still have some layering in front of it. I'd say where you have like one more layer of trees to really add. And kind of the same thing, kind of adding just the damp brush. Like it's very faint. It's not a heavily damp brush, just a very, very slight damp brush there. All right, so you can see our trees, our tree line is coming about. We're gonna give that a little bit more time. What I am noticing is that the underlayer of that yellow that we have is a little bit more yellow than I would have liked it to be. So we're just gonna take a light. And now this is a preference thing. You don't necessarily have to do this. Your tree might look great, but I'm just noticing in this one, it's a little bit vibrant in contrast. So I'm just taking a very, very faint wash of the brown and just trying to dull the tone just a little. This will make it a little bit less boom in your face yellow, but more of just the edge of the tree bark. Okay. I'd say this guy's pretty good. So we're going to go ahead and shift gears, and we're going to just do something fun here. This is one of my favorite parts, and we're going to use the oval wash brush. We're going to create these these pine leaves right here, these pine tree branches. And we're going to do that by taking the green color we've been using for the trees. Let me show you an example of what we're going to be doing before actually applying it. What you're going to be doing is we're going to be kind of doing these scribble effects. We're kind of using the side of the brush and kind of just creating these little leaf textures and not really thinking too much about it, kind of letting them be a little bit wild. But you can also kind of like sketch them out, kind of sketch out. This registers so much more in my brain when I think about sketching in watercolor. And that is a thing, that actually is a thing, which is really fun. But you can create kind of any texture you're wanting. We're kind of doing something similar to how the trees are made. We're just kind of going a little bit random, just kind of like letting it be a little rough. And this is also a really great way where you could just kind of like use your dry brush technique. Now the dry brush technique takes a little bit more room, I would say. So I'm not using really the dry brush technique right there. But that is what we're going to be trying to do, is just kind of creating rough leaf textures. I'm going to mix a little bit more of my green color because I think I'm going to run out. So the green color consists of the phthalo green and the burnt umber. That's all it is. I think one of my favorite things about this palette is that even though I can mix the colors, or I need to mix colors, it doesn't require a ton of mixing. It's not like I have to pull from 3 different colors. I can pretty much just pull from 2 colors and call it good and get the right variation that I need, which is very useful. And check that. So just, yeah, that's good. All right. So the idea is to have kind of like a branch coming from up above here, and then a couple of them coming here, indicating that we are standing in the forest. And this is actually, you do want this to be a little bit darker than the rest because we're dealing with the foreground, and this is where your darkest parts are going to be where your eye is going to focus on. It's not going to necessarily focus solely on these branches, but that is something to keep in mind, that because we want it to be darker than what's back there, because this is where our focal point is. And again, if you are struggling with kind of meticulously going in, hold it higher on the barrel of the brush. Just kind of sketch it in, making them nice and full, having some of the white peeking through. Kind of overlap them. Don't be afraid to overlap. I think you could say you can go in and add some little blatches while it's still wet, because that's going to help to kind of create some more color depth in your piece. right. Oh, I like these branches a lot more than these ones. I went too faint on these ones, but these definitely are like, yeah, this is the foreground, baby. All right, and what we're going to do is we're actually going to use that same green with the same brush, and we're going to start to create some grass. We're going to start to layer it right there, just right above it. We're going to start with one layer. Just try and go kind of back and forth there, kind of creating some grass textures. Those blades are not exactly thin blades, but that's okay. Now I am holding it a little bit closer to the barrel because I am able, that's where it's most comfortable for me. But I'm also not overthinking each individual blade of grass that I lay in. So if you need to hold it higher to create more organic movement, I should say, that is possible. We're gonna let that rest, but we are going to, we're gonna go ahead and do the trees next. Another layer of trees. This is probably gonna be our last layer of trees right here. Yeah, we're doing good. About 10-ish minutes before some show and tell. Remember, these are your front trees, so they can be bigger than the rest. But I am trying to mind where the edges hit that mushroom there, because I do want to frame the mushroom. Get out of here, fly. But by overlapping all those trees, that's how you're able to create that nice kind of forest look without having to overthink it too much, because you're just kind of taking it in layers. And you're just overlapping. Again, with the very, very lightly damp brush. Just kind of fading out some of that color. Now there is some white kind of peeking through right there, but that's not the end of the world. Still green for the most part. I'm just carrying that down. We're going to do another layer. I'm going to use that shadow color that we actually created for the tree. Or was it the tree? May have been the, I think it was the tree. And we're just going to kind of deepen, just to add another layer. That's what's going to kind of help it feel more. Deeper in color and contrast. It's definitely pushing the values more. I'm going to give you a moment. These areas. If this shrub I'm not able to finish this shrub on screen, I'm going to feel very, very targeted. I'm going to feel very betrayed because that'll be the second stream. If you weren't here last time, the shrub kind of betrayed me a little bit. The paper got a little overworked and I had to finish it off screen. And if it happens again with another shrub, I might lose my mind.
The shrub stands alone.
Yes. That shrub will be the bane of my existence. I'm going to dream about it. All right, let's try and go for the shrub. Kind of with the same mindset here. This shrub is in the foreground with our pine trees right there. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to do a similar texture, but we're going to be kind of clustering it as one kind of piece here. So kind of it's just one shrub. And the oval wash brush is really great for just kind of trying to cover in leafy textured areas. All right, this shrub may not be perfect, but I think it will be okay. And because I like to tweak things, I'm going to create another little layer of trees that right down there, but I'm going to make it a little bit faint, which means mostly water, less paint. Because we need some texture there. We want it to be a little bit lighter. And with that, I think we've hit completion. Other than the shrub that needs time to dry because it's just finicky like that. But I would go in and fill in that little white spot right there, but I'm just going to leave it for now. That's something to do whenever it's dry. So I will do the washi tape peel right now though. So if you are taking some time to finish up your piece, take your time. If you're not finished with it yet and you need to finish it off screen, that's also okay. Little behind the scenes, I was very worried when I was making this piece that there wasn't enough to it. And I had to rely on instinct based on past experience. Just like, I know I can be very ambitious and this is probably more than enough to carry us through a whole class. And I was right. But it wasn't the initial instinct. The initial instinct was that there wasn't enough to it.
How's everyone doing? I see there's some people working on some stuff in the live streams. I like the side by side.
Yes. I like the side by side because what I've noticed is that I like things across both pieces. Both pieces have things that I like, and both pieces have things that I don't care as much. I feel like I pushed the values a lot more on this piece than I did on this piece, which I didn't feel like was going to happen at first. But I like it so much more. And honestly, that's actually very opposite of the past experience, the past class examples that I've done. Normally, the example piece is the more saturated version, and this time it's been reversed, which is kind of nice. I'd say I like the mountain better in the original, but I like the mushroom better in the new one.
I think they both have their interesting
qualities. Yeah, most definitely. It looks like if you came back to the same spot on the mountain, like weeks later or days later or something like that. I don't know, maybe a year later, who knows.
Is that piece still a little wet? It might change the look after it dries more too.
It's true. That is true. The shrub is wet, but the rest is pretty much dry. we've still got some sheen with that shrub right there, but I'd say the shrub probably needs a little bit more. This one, especially once it's dry, probably needs a bit more saturation added to it because it looks a little bit like it's blended into the background. But it's not terrible. I would say I've conquered the shrub this time.
Conquered you're the shrub queen.
I have beat the shrub this week.
Cool.
Yeah.
Jennifer says, thanks, Bree. Learning a lot, but also still working / playing. Excellent.
That's honestly how you get better. It's just by spending time on it, playing around with it, exploring. Shrub is shrubbing. Yep, sure is.
Thursday afternoon, evening, just shrubbing along.
Wednesday's hump day, Thursday's shrub day.
Sometimes you just feel like a shrub. You wake up and
Yeah.
it's like, nah, I'm a shrub today.
Shrub it off. It's okay. Is there anybody that wants to share what they have worked on? You do not have to, but you are more than welcome to, even if it's just a work in progress.
Let's see. Anyone in the chat here? Let's see. No.
Totally fine if you don't want to, but I love seeing your work. This is my test sheet when I was assembling the original design, and just all my practice works, and I could tell I was really having fun with the branch work.
That's great. More things in the chat. Reen, let's see here. Reen Peters, thanks, Bree and everyone. It was a fun tutorial. Love the colors. A lot of great tips. And
Excellent.
then Bernie says, just here for the company. Art looks great. Working on some personal art.
So glad you got to tune in, Bernie. Didn't know we were going to get to see you here tonight. And yeah.
So then replace the spotlight. Go to Bree.
So with that, if there's nobody that wants to share, I do have an announcement to make, and you guys are going to be the first to hear about it. Over the next few weeks, I am going to be stepping down from my position as resident artist for WatercolorSnacks. I'm needing to focus some more attention on my family and my growing business. And so I will be stepping down, but we have Amelia Gossman. Is that how you pronounce the last name, Lee?
Yep.
Amelia Gossman coming in as the new resident artist for WatercolorSnacks. So she'll take my position of guiding you through classes and tutorials, answering questions, helping curate the boxes. And she's got a wide skill set of knowledge from her experience in school and just in other artwork forms and stuff like that she's going to be bringing. And if you don't know Amelia, I believe there's YouTube videos on the ArtSnacks YouTube channel of some live streams that she's done, and she's just really, really wonderful and very exciting. So she will be taking over the position of resident artist for WatercolorSnacks at the end of the month, I believe.
Yeah. So not a surprise to the ArtSnacks team. We've been working with Bree on this transition period for a while. She's been awesome in terms of giving us way heads up so that we have enough time to find another artist to step in her place. Obviously, not a shock to us, but probably a shock to you guys. But Jennifer says in the chat, boo, Bree, yay, Amelia, miss you, Bree, you're amazing. Yeah, Bree is amazing, but she's not going anywhere. She'll still be part of the ArtSnacks Mix
Oh,
community.
oh, yeah.
And yeah, so
I
it's
will always consider myself an ambassador at heart because I love ArtSnacks. I love everything about them. I just have to step down and focus on some more personal stuff for a while. So it is a bittersweet feeling because I have really, really enjoyed getting to teach the classes and guiding you through watercolor and getting to answer your questions. And I've learned a lot from you guys as well. I have learned how to make example pieces before like actually coming to the table, something I never did before, but also just a lot of other things. And it's been my pleasure to be a resident artist for you here at WatercolorSnacks and helping to kind of make your experience a good one. And I'm really excited for where Amelia is going to take this.
Yes, absolutely. And on that note, next class will be Bree's last session with us, and I think hopefully we'll have Amelia joining us as well, so we can introduce her and kind of like pass off the torch, if you will, from Bree to Amelia. But I believe that we have a post going up on Mix shortly after this recording is stopped that'll outline some of the details so that the wider community will know about what's going on with WatercolorSnacks transition. So yeah, thank you guys. Thank you, Bree, for joining us.
Thank you all very much for your support and for missing me while I'm stepping down.
Everyone's gonna miss you. I'm gonna miss you. Selfishly, I'm trying to think of other things that we could do with you in the future, right? Whether it's a box or a collection or a product line or something.
There is still opportunity to work. Hi, Jen. There's still opportunity to be teaming, collaborating with the ArtSnacks team in the future. It's just gonna be different.
So it's all gravy. And we still got one more class with you, so bring your stuff, bring your A game. We'll see you guys next time. I believe it's at the end of this month. Again,
yeah, September 30th. That's my last class with you. September 30th, and then Amelia will be taking over.
Oh, look at people love the idea of a curated special collection from Bree. So let's give Bree some time off, and then she'll circle back with us, and we'll figure out what we want to do together. But yeah, it's been like 2 years, right, Bree? You've been doing
2 years of WatercolorSnacks, yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, that's a good enough time, to pursue other amazing things. But yeah, we'll leave it there. You guys have a wonderful rest of your day. I'm gonna stop the recording.